When a violent gang of racist bikers ambushes Mike Tyson in a suburban neighborhood, they have no idea who they're messing with. Outnumbered but unfazed, Tyson fights back, leaving the gang battered, but when corrupt cops secretly working with the bikers frame him and haul him away, it seems the tables have turned. Taken to a secluded warehouse for a brutal beating, Tyson unleashes his fury, dismantling the gang and exposing the corrupt officers. As real law enforcement arrives, justice is finally served. With an impactful message on resilience and strength, Tyson proves that standing up to hate always prevails. Subscribe and like this video to see how the story unfolds. The soft click-clack of Mike Tyson's boots against the sidewalk provided a gentle soundtrack to the serene afternoon. As he walked, he paid little heed to the quaint houses, the manicured lawns, and the occasional curious glance of a neighbor. Tyson was, for all intents and purposes, a man on a mission, seemingly oblivious to the peaceful world around him. As Mike Tyson strolled, the sun's golden rays enveloped him in a warm embrace, his fists tucked comfortably in his pockets. His thoughts meandered aimlessly, content to bask in the tranquility of the day. His musings turned to the simple pleasures of life, savoring the quiet, the subtle scents of the nearby gardens, the warmth of the sun against his skin. But that peace, fragile and tenuous, was about to be shattered. As if on cue, the serene ambiance of the neighborhood was ripped apart by the sharp, aggressive growl of a revving engine. A sleek black pickup truck, gleaming in the afternoon sun, roared past Tyson in a violent symphony of speeding rubber and rumbling horsepower. The truck screeched to a stop up ahead, the echo of its tires skidding against the asphalt, reverberating like thunder in the otherwise still air. Ignoring the cacophonous arrival, Tyson continued his stroll as if nothing had happened, his mind wandering to other matters. But then, the sound of their laughter, cruel and mocking, pierced the veil of his thoughts, capturing his attention like a spring-loaded trap. The doors swung open with a metallic click-clang, and out stepped three men, their shaved heads gleaming under the harsh sunlight. Their leather vests, adorned with various patches and symbols, seemed to reflect their hardened, sinister personalities. The thug, his words dripping with disdain, confronted Tyson with a chilling sense of authority. His hulking frame and prison tattoos betrayed a history of violence. His sneer, an unwavering challenge to the man before him. Tyson stopped in his tracks, his body going still, his muscles tensing as if ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. Exhaling slowly, the heavyweight champion's mind was already moving through the fight scenarios that were rapidly unfolding in his mind's eye. Mike Tyson, with a steely glint in his eye, assessed the situation with the coolness of a seasoned professional. Having faced these types of wannabe tough guys countless times before, Tyson recognized the signs of their bravado, their faux toughness that depended solely on numbers. Without breaking eye contact, Tyson spoke, his voice even, measured. "I'm just walking." A subtle shift in his stance signaled he wasn't about to back down without a fight. The trio, sensing the tension in the air, spread out around Mike, their collective gaze as focused and menacing as a pack of wolves circling their prey. In a display of deliberate disrespect, one of the thugs hawked a glob of saliva onto the ground at Tyson's feet. His lips curled into a malicious grin. "We don't like strangers in our neighborhood," he growled, his words laced with venom. "Especially ones like you." Tyson's eyebrow raised slightly, a calculated gesture that betrayed his curiosity. "Ones like me?" he repeated, his words sounding almost rhetorical, as if he were toying with the thugs in front of him. The third member of the group, his laugh sending a chill down Tyson's spine, leaned forward, his words filled with an unmistakable hatred. "You know exactly what we mean." Mike Tyson's shoulders slumped ever so slightly as he inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring with frustration. It seemed like trouble had a way of following him, like a grim reaper that refused to stay hidden in the shadows. His gaze, now an icy mask of resolve, fixed on the three thugs who were smugly awaiting his response. It was clear to them, or so they thought, that they had the upper hand. The gang leader, overconfident in his own strength, swung a haymaker towards Mike Tyson's jaw, his smile broadening into a sneer. But Tyson, with the reflexes of a panther, tilted his head ever so slightly, allowing the punch to sail harmlessly past his face. It was a swift, elegant evasion, almost poetic in its precision. Like a snake coiling for a strike, Mike Tyson's fist shot out with the speed of a lightning bolt, connecting with the leader's ribs with a sickening crunch. The thug stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock and pain, his smile vanishing like a mirage in the desert. The remaining two members of the gang, caught off guard by Tyson's counterattack, froze for a split second, their leader's wince of pain betraying the lethal force that Mike Tyson had so casually unleashed. The gang leader, his breath ragged, nursed his bruised ribs with a shaky hand, his eyes still betraying his disbelief. "The hell?" he managed to gasp out, his shock evolving into rage as he struggled to comprehend how a single blow had brought him to his knees. Mike Tyson's gaze, dark and relentless, fixed on his adversaries. His words, laced with deadly intent, echoed across the quiet street. "Walk away." But the thugs, their arrogance outweighing their reason, disregarded Tyson's warning. With a collective roar, the remaining two members of the gang charged at Mike Tyson, eager to exact their vengeance, but the former heavyweight champion was not easily cowed. Moving with the speed and precision of a precision-engineered machine, Tyson spun to face his attackers, unleashing a devastating right hook that connected squarely with the jaw of the first thug. The force of the blow was so immense that the man's legs gave out, sending him crashing to the pavement in a twisted, unconscious heap. Before the third thug could bring his weapon to bear, Mike Tyson's evasive maneuver left him open to a devastating counterattack. Ducking under the steel baton, Tyson quickly closed the distance, his movements a blur of muscle and sinew. A moment later, his left arm shot upward with bone-shattering force, connecting with his opponent's chin in a textbook uppercut that sent the biker soaring into the air. The gang's leader, his mind racing with disbelief and fear, stared at the scene of carnage around him. He'd never seen a man fight with such ferocious skill before, and his mind struggled to reconcile the impossible reality of what he'd just witnessed. He managed to sputter out, his words trailing off as he took a single, faltering step backward. "You're—" Mike Tyson, his expression impassive, stalked forward, his feet seeming to glide across the pavement. The sound of Mike Tyson's sigh echoed through the quiet neighborhood, an almost mournful exhalation as he watched the last thug flee the scene. "Shoulda let it go," he whispered, a hint of regret creeping into his voice. "Shoulda known guys like that never fight alone." In the aftermath of the fight, the realization of the potential consequences of his actions struck Tyson with the force of a punch to the gut. The police would be alerted by the commotion, and he needed to disappear before they arrived. As the leader fled, disappearing into a nearby corner store in a desperate attempt to evade Mike Tyson's wrath, Mike began to walk away, his pace slow and deliberate. With every step, he silently hoped that the fight was over, the chaos now firmly in the past. Yet deep down he knew that the violence that had erupted could not be easily forgotten, and the effects would linger in the air long after he'd gone. As Mike Tyson continued walking, the rhythmic thud of his boots the only sound in the silence, his senses remained alert to any sign of danger. The aftermath of the fight still hung heavy in the air, like the aftermath of a storm. Mike Tyson, an instinctual unease rising in his gut, glanced over his shoulder, his eyes narrowing at the sight of a dozen motorcycles and trucks barreling down the street. The roar of their engines filled the air, drowning out the panicked whispers and rustling curtains as the people of the neighborhood sensed the arrival of a new threat. So much for it being over, Mike thought grimly. He knew he had to act fast before this new wave of trouble engulfed him completely. The leader, his body still bearing the marks of the previous encounter with Mike Tyson, limped out of the truck, his breathing ragged from pain and fury. The rage was palpable in his eyes as he glanced at the fresh blood on his bandages. From the throng of newcomers, a biker, 6'6", with a frame that seemed to challenge the very limits of human strength, bellowed out, "That him!" His voice boomed across the street like a warning siren, his presence announcing his status as an enforcer. The leader, his teeth bared in a savage sneer, snarled, "Yeah, that's him." The battle lines were drawn, the air thick with the promise of violence. A heavy sigh escaped Mike Tyson's lips as the gravity of his situation began to sink in. "Here we go again," he thought, his hands slowly curling into fists as he prepared himself for what was about to unfold. The gang advanced, their weapons glinting in the daylight, their steps unhurried and deliberate, the gleam of anticipation in their eyes. signaling their anticipation for bloodshed. They surrounded Mike Tyson, forming a deadly circle of steel and menace. The first attacker, muscles rippling beneath his leather vest, lunged forward, swinging a crowbar like a medieval mace. The air cracked as the weapon whistled towards Tyson, its deadly path aimed at his skull. Mike Tyson, his movements almost blurring with speed, weaved to the side, evading the crowbar's lethal arc by a hair's breadth. With the elegance of a master boxer, he launched a straight right punch that sank deep into his attacker's stomach. The man, his teeth gritted in agony, doubled over, the pain slicing through him like a hot blade. But before he could recover, Tyson struck again. This time, the crack of bones splintering under his fist was unmistakable, sending the assailant crashing to the ground, his body limp and unconscious. Mike Tyson's senses were heightened to a level of almost superhuman awareness. He seemed to dance amid the chaos, each violent exchange a lethal symphony of calculated brutality. Another biker swung a chain, its links singing through the air like the headsman's blade, but Tyson caught it midair, the chain's momentum pulling the attacker within range of a brutal knee to the face. The third assailant lunged forward, his knife glinting in the sunlight, but Tyson, with a sudden agile turn, avoided the strike with ease. Like dominoes toppling one by one, the assailants fell, their bodies strewn across the asphalt, their weapons discarded and forgotten. But even as their numbers dwindled, their determination seemed undiminished, their resolve hardening like steel in the furnace of their hatred. Amid this chaos, Tyson moved with a grace that belied the sheer brutality of his attacks. His fists were blurs of motion, each strike a surgical strike against his opponent's weak spots, shattering bones and crushing organs with effortless power. The desperation of the attackers was palpable, their coordinated attacks giving way to a frenzied free-for-all. One thug rushed from behind, his arms looping around Tyson's waist in an attempt to immobilize him, but Tyson, his reflexes razor-sharp, drove an elbow into his attacker's temple, sending him sprawling to the ground like a rag doll. In the next moment, another assailant closed in, swinging a bat with the fury of a demon. Tyson, his arms interlocked in front of him, blocked the blow, using his forearms like shields. Spinning like a tornado, Tyson turned the blocked blow into an opening, launching an uppercut with such force that it lifted his opponent off his feet. The man flew backward, his body collapsing onto the pavement with a thud. But just as quickly, Tyson's victory turned to a desperate struggle. They came at him like a tidal wave of rage, their numbers overwhelming his defenses. A heavy blow to the ribs sent a shock wave of pain through his body. Another biker, his face contorted with rage, connected his baton against Tyson's back. Battered, bruised, but not beaten, Mike Tyson reeled from the onslaught of blows. His indomitable spirit kept him standing, but he knew he couldn't keep this pace for much longer. The tide of the battle seemed to be turning against him, like the shift of the sea before a tsunami. His situation was desperate, and there was no end in sight. And then the familiar wail of sirens pierced through the air, their sound rushing toward the melee like a beacon of hope. The police had finally arrived. The clash of fists and steel was immediately drowned out by the cacophony of police sirens, the sound accompanied by a phalanx of officers clad in riot gear, their weapons aimed at the combatants. Tyson, his chest heaving as he gasped for air, raised his hands in a gesture of compliance, his gaze fixed on the officers. But even as he did, his peripheral vision caught a glimpse of the gang leader, his face twisted into a smug, victorious smirk, as if he had anticipated this turn of events all along. A sinister realization began to dawn on Tyson as the officers advanced on him, their weapons still trained on his position. It became clear that they weren't here to diffuse the chaos, but rather to apprehend the former champion. As the officers closed in, the gang leader remained where he stood, a self-satisfied grin creasing his face. "You're under arrest," the lead officer declared, his voice devoid of emotion. Tyson frowned, his face twisting into a mask of confusion and anger. "For what?" he growled. The officer's gaze shifted to the gang leader, his eyes betraying a hint of complicity. "Assaulting these fine gentlemen," the officer repeated with a thin smile, gesturing to the bikers. The members of the gang, now sheltered behind the line of officers, shot smirks at Tyson, their faces twisted with smugness. It was clear that they'd planned this, manipulating the police into becoming unwitting accomplices in their revenge. Tyson closed his eyes, letting out a long, resigned breath. His muscles tensed, poised for action, but he knew there was no escape now. The bitter realization burned inside him like acid. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Tyson, his chest rising and falling with each labored breath, stood alone in the center of the suburban street. Around him, the debris of battle, bent steel, broken glass, discarded weapons, lay like a testament to the violence that had just unfolded. Yet, despite his Herculean efforts, Tyson found himself surrounded by the very people sworn to uphold the law. But as he took in the grim expressions on their faces, the realization struck him. These cops weren't here for justice. They were here to take him in, to make him pay for a crime he didn't commit. The gang leader, his face now etched with a self-satisfied smirk, stood amidst the ranks of the police officers. His hold on the world of crime clearly extended beyond the street, his influence allowing him to maneuver events to his advantage. "You're under arrest for aggravated assault," the officer repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. Tyson's nostrils flared in anger, his gaze focused on the officer, his eyes smoldering with contempt. "Self-defense," he snapped, the word coming out through gritted teeth. "That's what this was. You're taking their word over mine?" The officer, his smirk unwavering, retorted, "When it's 10 against 1, self-defense looks a lot like a massacre." The sarcasm dripping from his voice like venom. Behind the police line, the gang members who were still conscious exchanged knowing glances, their grins spreading like cracks in a broken mirror. Bruised and bloodied, they reveled in their newfound advantage. Tyson's breath came in slow, measured breaths, each exhalation a release of tension, a focus of his mind and body. His muscles tightened in anticipation as the officers approached, their movements swift and coordinated. Without warning, 2 of the officers stepped forward, grabbing Tyson with rough hands and shoving him against the hood of a squad car. His skull reverberated with the impact, but he kept his composure, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing him react. This was war now, and Tyson knew he was in for the fight of his life. As the handcuffs were snapped into place, the cold steel bit into Tyson's skin like ice, each click of the lock sounding like the steady march of inevitability. In the window's reflection, Tyson could see his own image, his face betraying no hint of the tumultuous thoughts raging within him. His expression was as impenetrable as stone, his words, when they came, clear and determined. "You're making a mistake," he warned, his voice as calm as the eye of a storm. The officer's derisive chuckle was like the sound of razor blades against metal. "No, you made the mistake of walking into the wrong neighborhood," he spat, his arrogance a venomous snake coiling around Tyson's throat. "And now you'll pay for it." Basking in their apparent victory, the gang leader's cackling laughter echoed across the street, his words cutting through the tension like a serrated blade. "See you real soon, champ," he jeered, reveling in his own cleverness. As the police car pulled away from the scene, the sirens fell silent, the flashing lights dimmed, and the streets of the suburban neighborhood faded into the distance. But instead of heading towards the precinct, the squad car veered off course, rumbling along an uneven back road, swallowed by the shadows of the encroaching trees. Tyson, his wrists bound by the handcuffs, sat rigid and watchful in the back seat, the primal instinct for survival kicking into overdrive as the squad car took him further and further away from the relative safety of the public eye. As Tyson scrutinized the 2 cops in the front, his eyes narrowing, he began to see the signs, their tattoos, the symbols of hate and violence etched into their skin, told a story of their own, and their laughter, raw and ugly, erupted at the most vile, bigoted jokes, a telltale indicator of the darkness lurking beneath their badges. It was then that Tyson realized that these men were no ordinary officers of the law. No, they were enforcers for the gang, wolves in sheep's clothing, exploiting their positions for the worst possible reasons. As the squad car rolled on, its wheels churning through the dirt road, Mike Tyson pieced together the grim truth. These men, these officers, were nothing but lackeys of the gang, their allegiance pledged to the thugs who'd instigated the attack. They were wolves in the clothing of sheep, disguising their true intentions behind a veil of authority. This wasn't a matter of upholding the law, it was about dispensing their twisted form of justice, and Mike Tyson was to be their sacrifice on the altar of revenge. The police car screeched to a stop, its tires kicking up a cloud of dust as it pulled into the lot of an abandoned warehouse. The building stood like a tombstone in the night, its windows black and lifeless. And then, the gang, over 20 bikers, clad in leather and denim, their faces hidden by helmets and goggles, emerged from the shadows like vengeful wraiths. Knives, bats, chains, their weapons gleamed in the faint moonlight, eager for the fight. In the back seat of the squad car, Tyson let out a slow breath. The two officers, their grins as twisted as their corrupt souls, dragged Tyson from the squad car, their grip on his arms like the jaws of a vice. They tossed him forward like a piece of meat, leaving him standing alone in the moonlight. The gang circled him, forming a ring of deadly intent. Their leader, his hands clenched into fists, his shoulders rolling with coiled power, stepped forward, his boots crunching on the gravel. "This time," the leader growled, his voice low and dangerous, "you ain't walking away." The threat hung heavy in the air, the gang leader's eyes burning with a hateful flame. Like a pack of hyenas pouncing on their prey, the gang erupted into motion. The first biker swung a baseball bat with brutal force, the sound of impact, a sickening crack, echoing across the warehouse lot. The blow connected with Tyson's ribs, the pain searing through his body like lightning. In a frenzy of blows, another gang member landed a punch into Tyson's gut, the force of the blow rocking the former champ, but he refused to fall, yet even as he weathered the assault, the gang moved like a swarm of bees, a flurry of fists and feet descending upon him. A vicious kick to the back of Tyson's knee sent him to the ground, his body hitting the concrete like a falling statue. The gang leader, his teeth bared in a victorious snarl, stooped over Tyson's fallen form, his hand clamped tight around the champion's bruised jaw. "Not so tough now, huh?" He spat, the words tasting like acid on his tongue. "You think you can mess with us and get away with it?" The gang closed in around them, their faces a distorted mask of hatred, their weapons raised, as if waiting for a signal from their leader to finish the job. Tyson's gaze, now cold and unreadable, met the leader's smirk, the tension between them palpable. The silence stretched on for a heartbeat, each man locking eyes with the other, the world reduced to this one incendiary moment. And then, without warning, the leader spat in Tyson's face, the wad of saliva an insult so brutal and deliberate that it might as well have been a bullet. In that moment, all reason left the gang leader, his hatred clouding his judgment. The moment the leader's spit hit Tyson's cheek, it was as if a switch had been flipped inside him. Gone was the impassive mask that had until now shielded his fury. In its place was a raging inferno, a fire so intense that it seemed to crackle within the depths of his soul. Tyson erupted into action with the force of an erupting volcano. His entire body, fueled by a volcanic fury, seemed to move as one, his muscles coiled and unleashed in a blur of pure primal rage. Without warning, Tyson's forehead slammed into the leader's face, the sickening sound of cartilage shattering ringing out like a death knell. Blood, a scarlet spray of vengeance, fountained into the air, its metallic scent mixing with the stench of hatred that hung over the scene. In the space of a single heartbeat, the gang, their expressions frozen in shock, seemed to realize the fatal error of their leader's ways. Yet their bodies, paralyzed by fear, refused to move. The two cops, caught off guard by the unexpected turn of events, scrambled to draw their weapons, their hands clumsy and trembling as adrenaline surged through their veins. But before the guns could clear their holsters, Mike Tyson was already in motion. Spinning with cat-like agility, Tyson unleashed his shackles as a weapon, their chain whipping through the air with a ferocious speed. In the blink of an eye, the steel links struck the first cop with a bone-shattering impact, the sound of breaking bones drowned out by the officer's scream of agony. The second cop, desperate to defend himself, barely managed to unsheath his gun before Tyson moved in, his forehead colliding with the officer's sternum like a freight train. Fueled by rage, the bikers launched themselves at Tyson, their weapons swinging with deadly intent. But Mike, like a hurricane, unleashed a storm of retaliatory blows. his every movement calculated and lethal. A baseball bat, swung with murderous force, narrowly missed Tyson as he ducked, only for him to spin and drive his elbow into the attacker's throat with a force that sent the biker to his knees, gasping and wheezing. Another biker, his eyes wild with fury, thrust a knife at Tyson's throat. With the precision of a surgeon, Tyson's hand shot up, his fingers closing around the knife-wielding biker's wrist in a death grip. With a swift, vicious twist, he snapped the bones like twigs, the biker's scream of pain echoing across the warehouse lot. The third assailant, catching Tyson from behind, lunged forward with a feral snarl, but Tyson reacted with a sudden, savage backward kick. The third assailant's head snapped back like a rag doll's, his body hurled across the asphalt. In the wake of Tyson's brutal counterattack, only a few members of the gang remained standing, their courage faltering in the face of the former champion's unrelenting ferocity. The leader, his face a grotesque mask of bruising and blood, clawed his way to his feet, his breathing ragged and labored. In his trembling hand, he brandished a gun, pointing it at Tyson with quivering hands. Tyson's eyes, unblinking and unflinching, bore into the gang leader like twin lasers, the piercing gaze cutting through the leader's fragile composure. "You don't want to do that," Tyson growled, his voice deadly calm. As the leader raised his weapon, the barrel quivering as he pulled the trigger, Tyson reacted with almost inhuman speed. In one fluid motion, he snatched a jagged rock from the ground and whipped it at the gang leader with devastating accuracy. The rock, propelled with unerring precision, connected with the leader's hand, sending the gun skittering across the pavement as the shattered bones screamed in agony. With a chilling grace, the gun skittered across the asphalt, bouncing and spinning out of reach. The leader, his face a mask of pain and fury, knew that he'd lost the only advantage he had left. In that split second, Tyson closed the distance, his movements a blur of lightning-quick reflexes. He grabbed the leader by his leather vest, yanking him forward and using the momentum to unleash a savage combination of punches. Tyson's fists rained down on the leader like hammer blows, the sound of bones shattering like thunderclaps in the night. The relentless flurry of Tyson's fists struck with the force of a freight train, each blow landing with devastating power. The left hook connected with the leader's jaw, snapping his head back and rattling his teeth. The right uppercut tore into the leader's ribs, the sound of his bones fracturing, filling the night like the strike of a sledgehammer. And finally, the right cross found its mark, connecting with the leader's temple with a resounding crack that echoed through the lot. The leader, slumped to the ground, his body broken and his spirit crushed, joined the ranks of his own men. The lot was littered with the defeated remnants of the gang, their groans and cries of pain a morbid symphony of failure. The corrupt cops, their intentions as shattered as their helmets, lay motionless on the ground, their efforts to subdue Tyson having ended in humiliating failure. Mike Tyson stood alone, surrounded by the destruction he'd wrought upon his enemies, like a lone wolf surveying the carnage of a hunt gone right. Tyson stood alone, his chest heaving, his knuckles a grim reminder of the violence he'd just inflicted upon his foes. His senses were on high alert, his ears pricked up like a wolf sensing danger. In the distance, the wail of police sirens cut through the night, the sound an ever-growing threat to his freedom. As the blare of the sirens grew louder, the realization dawned on Tyson. This was it. The real authorities had finally arrived. In the wake of the bloody spectacle, Tyson's escape was now an unlikely prospect. Perhaps a neighbor, awoken by the chaos, had called the police. Or maybe a silent witness, hidden in the shadows, had dialed 911 at the first sign of violence. Whatever the case, Tyson knew he had to act fast. With an air of defiance, Tyson remained unmoved, his feet firmly planted on the ground. As the police officers swarmed the scene, barking orders and demanding explanations, his shoulders remained broad and his gaze was unwavering. He stood like a mountain amidst the swirling storm of chaos, unyielding in the face of the authorities' accusations. His stance spoke volumes. He was here to stay. In their bruised and battered states, the bikers' attempt at weaving a false narrative was akin to spinning lies from shards of broken glass. As the police officers took in the gruesome scene, their eyes roamed the area, taking in the scattered weapons, the battered bodies, and the puddles of crimson that stained the pavement like a macabre mosaic. Against the biker's desperate lies, Tyson's truth stood resolute, unshakable, and undeniable. His words cut through the web of deceit, piercing the veil of the biker's falsehoods. Justice, elusive for so long, finally took root in the soil of this violent encounter, its tendrils wrapping themselves around the perpetrators, the corrupt cops, the remnants of the gang, and their defeated leader. All faced the consequences of their actions, their fate sealed by the iron hand of the law. Tyson, his knuckles still raw, stood with an air of vindication. For once, the system had sided with him. As the police led the criminals away, Tyson watched the scene unfold with a grim satisfaction, his eyes never leaving the defeated figures of his assailants. And then, without a word, he turned and walked away from the chaos. His steps, heavy with the weight of his experiences, were also imbued with the knowledge that he'd emerged victorious. The gang's hatred had been repelled, their attempts at vengeance thwarted by the very walls they'd tried to use against him. As Tyson left the warehouse lot behind, a young black teenager, his eyes alight with wonder, approached him. The reverence in his voice was unmistakable, his words echoing the admiration of a child meeting his hero for the first time. "You really took down all those guys?" the teenager asked, his words laced with awe. Mike Tyson, his smirk tinged with both humor and pride, responded with a single word, "Yeah." Tyson, sensing the profound curiosity behind the teenager's question, paused before replying, his mind pondering the answer with an unexpected depth. "Because no one else would," he said, his voice heavy with conviction. "They wanted me to stay down, to let them walk all over me. But I've spent my life getting up when I've been knocked down, and I wasn't about to stop now." The teenager, his eyes fixed on Tyson, nodded slowly, soaking in the wisdom from this living legend. His small shoulders, under the weight of Tyson's hand, seemed to gain an invisible strength, a newfound resolve. "Listen," Tyson continued, his words like the steady strike of a hammer on an anvil. "You don't win by being angry, you win by being stronger, smarter, ready. They wanted to break me, but they underestimated my will to survive. Remember that." The teenager, his face now set with a steely determination, watched as Tyson turned away, his silhouette fading into the shadows of the city. But as the champion vanished into the night, the impact of his words lingered, their truth sinking into the young man's mind like seeds planted in fertile soil. And as the city stirred to life around them, the world would bear witness to this singular moment in time, an event that would echo through the ages, a tale of courage and resilience that would refuse to be forgotten.